to go. Um, I'm gonna record this just for the benefit of those who can't be here tonight, but I know really want to watch this. And James, just want to unpack kind of your journey so far. So, can everybody see my screen? Okay, cool. So, just a little bit of obviously just teeing up the reason for this call and the reason why myself and Sam spoke about this earlier. We're going to do a hot seat every single month because there's always a handful of people that are just doing exceptionally well, and James is one of them. And I feel he just kind of represented a few different things that I really like about James's journey so far. And you guys know by now, the mission is to help you look, feel, perform your very best. James is very much on that track. We just need to make sure we see it through, make sure there's no more challenges and obstacles. And the reason why I wanted to kind of pull James on at this point is because obviously, by contrast, the last hot seat we did, client result was a little bit longer. But I just wanted to show some of you like some of what is possible in the short term, because James, as you've seen, 7 kilos down in 8 weeks from the 7th of December. Very, very possible to drop for every single person on this call, half a kilo to a kilo, just by focusing on ultimately pulling the right levers. And what I will say is you will always hit roadblocks. And there's a saying I absolutely love. When it comes to any challenge or any time things get a little bit hot in the kitchen, the same boiling water that softens a potato hardens the egg. So like you have to understand sometimes that challenges, it's the circumstances are the same. It's how you deal with them and how you kind of choose to work around. And myself and Sam, we've seen firsthand sometimes people aren't as resilient. They don't like to find workarounds of things. And the reason why I've asked James to share his journey tonight is because he has, and he's doing a great job. So, James, just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do for work, just a little bit of background, just separate to health and fitness, first of all.
Yeah, so I live in just about Horsforth near Rodley. I'm from the south originally. I moved up to Yorkshire in 2015. Unfortunately, a woman brought me up. We're no longer together. So, so this part of the world is sort of still fairly new to me. I work in insurance, deal with sort of private client side of that business. So it's looking after high net worth families and individuals and ensuring their sort of assets, whether it be household, art, jewelry, that sort of stuff. I suppose if it's sort of to just wind back and give a bit of context, I've always been sort of fairly sporty, played a lot of rugby, especially through my sort of teens and 20s. Always been active, but not necessarily always been in shape. So I can sort of talk about that sort of history that I've sort of had over the last 41 years of my life, to just give you maybe a bit more context in terms of the program and how I've got to this point. But that should set the scene.
I love that. And I just want to point out, I hope you don't mind me saying, you're a dad as well, aren't you?
Yeah. I've got a 9-year-old daughter, yeah.
Yep. I think that's important for some of the people who watch things back. Like one of the key things that they use as an excuse is being a parent, having responsibilities. And I just wanted to point that out for the benefit of those who are not on the call as well. And as you can see, guys, these are the 8-week results. This is literally, James, isn't it? It's from the 7th of December to this week's check-in. And as you can see, which we will get into, he's wearing a boot because we had a little incident, didn't we, in there? But the incident, it was just explain to everyone about that, because I'm sure that'll come out in terms of the obstacles. But
so I think it was 2 weeks ago. I had norovirus for a couple of days, and I was getting a bit annoyed that I hadn't been out for a run or got to the gym. And then woke up, I think, 2 days after suffering a little bit. And I thought, actually, I feel all right. I'm going to go for a run. It was about 5:20 in the morning, 5:30, had the head torch on, literally left. And within a minute, I'd just basically landed in a pothole, rolled my foot, and yeah, it was. Well, I heard a crack. I wasn't sure whether it was my trainer hitting the side of the pothole on my foot. Um, and then it didn't really hurt initially, but I stood there for about 4 minutes. I was actually thinking about just continuing running, and then I'm quite pleased I didn't really, because in about 10, 20 minutes it was pretty painful. So
Yeah.
just left it for a couple of days, and then got an X-ray, I think 2 days later, and they just confirmed the fifth metatarsal break in
Yeah.
my left foot. So pretty
So,
annoying.
man, it is annoying, but it gives a little bit of context so far as to James's journey over the last 8 weeks or so. And James, as you know, as I've kind of managed your expectations with these questions, but there's there's a few questions I want to ask you specifically. First of which is, why did you actually join the program?
Yeah, so again, I think there's probably three drivers for me, really. I'd say health being one. I think sort of turning 40 18 months ago, and sort of being about 125 kilograms at the time. Um, I think something that I didn't want to do was sort of follow my dad's path. He died quite young, 58. Um, so I think that sort of turning 40 was a bit of a milestone for me, in terms of almost a bit of dread in terms of getting old, getting unhealthy. So that's probably one driver. I'd say the second driver is probably a sort of fear around not hitting my potential. And I
Yeah.
think there was a point last year where I ran a marathon. I ran Manchester in May last year, and I was sort of aiming for sub four, just sub four-ish. And I was sort of on course for that, and I think I missed out by about 3 minutes. But the people around me were sort of saying, "Yeah, it's an impressive time for a big guy." And
Yeah.
I don't know, for some reason that label didn't really sit comfortable with me. I just thought, you know, if I can do sort of 4 hour marathon at 124, 125 kgs, what could I do at 90? So there was that sort of untapped fear of sort of not knowing my potential. And I suppose the third reason really is what we mentioned earlier, my daughter, actually, just setting an example to her, really, in
Mm.
terms of just getting myself into good shape.
I love that. Obviously, I can relate to you on a very personal level as well. I think it's very important for parents to set a good example, as I'm sure some of you relate directly to. All of you will most likely agree with that statement. Um, so thank you for that, James. Really helpful. Um, and thinking back to when you started, because obviously it's not that long ago.
Yeah.
What were the key areas that you needed guidance with, like initially?
Yeah, so I guess in the sort of months in the summer prior to sort of engaging with you, James, I'd lost quite a lot of weight sort of on my own accord. I think sort of 3.5, 4 months, I'd lost about 20 kilograms. Um, so my motivation, I think, was there, and my discipline in terms of my, I suppose, desire to achieve what I was set out to. Um, but I think there was a couple of things I sort of, by that time, doing it on your own, you sort of feeling quite drained with the whole process. I wasn't liking the way I looked despite losing that weight.
Yeah,
I was definitely not eating enough, not hitting enough protein. I was probably too restrictive in terms of diet. So I suppose those two things, and then I suppose what I really needed was accountability to sort of follow through really on that. So yeah, accountability was a big thing. A structured plan that was sort of sustainable,
yeah,
rather than just sort of calorie restriction.
yeah,
Clear nutrition advice, and I suppose a sort of structure around training that sort of gave me back sort of a bit of purpose and intent on
yeah.
for my workouts.
I love that. I love what you said about restriction with food, because again, this is something that's super relevant And you won't see behind the scenes, but we, both myself and Sam, we know that there's some people who are very, very restrictive, and they'll just want to see that instant weight drop. And like you said, they end up just looking like a skinny version of what they looked like before. They don't
Yeah.
like the shape change, and they get so far down the path, either can't sustain it, or they're just not happy with the overall direction. So I'm glad you brought that up. Very, very insightful there, and I agree with all of that as well. Um, Obviously, there has been some setbacks which you've kind of touched on a little bit already, but there'll have been other challenges as well that I know that you haven't kind of outlined just yet.
Yeah.
But in relation to setbacks and challenges, obviously the big one is your foot.
Yeah.
How did we deal with them?
Well, we had a crisis meeting, didn't we? And
We did.
I suppose we obviously acknowledged that we sort of had to pivot and create and adapt really around, I suppose, accommodating the injury in terms of the exercises. I think you put together a new plan pretty quickly. I think the next day actually I hobbled to the gym and I went through a week's worth of working out exercises in one morning. It took me about 3 hours, but I went through it. I made notes on what I could and couldn't do. Um, and then we adjusted the calories a bit, didn't we? Just to take into account of the activity levels being lower.
Yep.
And I think after that sort of process, it was more of I went from sort of feeling really sort of annoyed and pissed off and thought that everything was ruined to actually this is now a new challenge. It's almost a reset, as it were. So mentally, I think that sort of reframe completely changed. And I think actually what that probably did was because I knew I was sort of at a bit of a disadvantage, it made me focus on or sort of double down on sort of the nutrition, things where I was slightly missing my macros or not quite being as consistent. I think if you look at my logbook now, you'd see that, protein, calories, everything is now more consistent
Yeah.
with the result. So yeah, it's one of those really. So you can't really do too much to sort of change what happened, but you can certainly change the response.
Absolutely. We did. We pivoted quickly. We saw it as an obstacle, and I think just to kind of relate to you, like I think anything is solvable. Like it just needs a strategy. You need to be in a good place to actually execute it.
Yeah.
And when I think back to, I've never shared this with the group before, but I remember I was in training for a big competition back in my swimming days, and it was kind of aligned like you can't move these things, like they are kind of when they are. And I
Yeah.
think it was 5 weeks out, I tore my rotator cuff, and I'd literally been training for I think 2 years in intensive training. I've not done any competitive meets, and I tore my rotator cuff in the run up. And my obviously my coach had to settle me, had to come up with a strategy, had to physio, all this different stuff. But actually, just by kicking in the pool and looking at things and paying attention to everything else, in the long term, it made me much harder upstairs and actually addressed some of the other weaknesses that I had. So in the long term, and it ended up being a really good thing. And I like what you said to me as well. Hope you don't mind me sharing this, but you said it was a bit of a hero story, which I like as well.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. I think everyone likes a comeback, don't they? So I think,
Everyone loves an underdog,
yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So leading on to like your
Mm.
lessons, then, what have been your key lessons so far? Because again, we're still quite early days, aren't we?
Yeah. I think from a sort of principles perspective, like adherence is everything. I think sticking to a plan consistently and I suppose keeping the promises that you make to yourself is far more important than sort of perfection or striving for perfection. And I think once you get into that sort of very process driven mentality, it I don't know, you sort of you just stack the days and once you start seeing progress, it then reinforces that behavior and it just sort of snowballs, I guess.
Yeah,
So probably one thing. And it's, it's okay to have a bad day as well. Progress does fluctuate.
Yeah,
Um, so I think they're probably sort of from a sort of principle point of view, probably two of the biggest things I've learned. In terms of sort of the practicalities, I'd say tracking is king. I've never tracked calories before, and I think if you can master that and get into good habits with that, it's half of the battle. For me, nutrition is pretty much most of the battle. Um, so I think nailing that has been a game changer for me. So that's a big takeaway. And the other thing that I think has helped when sort of struggling to hit protein was sort of that bookending. I think
yeah,
a few weeks early on, I think I was sort of struggling to hit my protein through Whole Foods, and you said, "Well, get it in at the start of the day, and at the end of the day." And I listened to that, and I think since that, it's become a lot easier.
love that. I think I like what you said there about adherence.
Yeah,
Myself and Sam, we speak about all this the time. The most adherent clients are not the ones who just want it the most, but they're also the ones that are the most educated and they see the value in actually learning and understanding why some of these things are so important. Because if you understand kind of how everything lifestyle and food and exercise affects your health, your well-being, how you feel day to day, it makes it so much easier to value it very highly because you don't want to go against it because it just makes you feel terrible. So I'm really glad you said that, James. Um, in relation to, obviously, I'm sure people have started to notice um, around you that your identity is starting to change and your physical appearance is starting to change.
yeah.
But from your perspective, how is your identity changing? How do you feel like it's changing just internally as well?
Um, I think I see myself differently now, probably more capable, more in control, especially around sort of food. And I've not really had any sort of self-sabotage moments, which in the past would have easily happened at some point. Um, I think the other sort of shift has been, I suppose, around trying to articulate it, but I suppose putting aside short-term gratification for long-term progress.
Yeah,
So, say no to the right things, not chasing stuff. I think that sort of life where I used to do that sort of feels quite irrelevant now to me, in some regards. I think my confidence, my self image has definitely improved. I've had to buy a new wardrobe. Um, I've I fit into clothes that I think I last wore in 2014. So yeah, there's not many of them left, but of the ones I've kept, you know, there's always things that people keep in their wardrobe and never ever wear. But yeah, I put something on the other day that was, I think, last worn in Portugal in 2014. So yeah, so there's definitely that confidence and self-image. And yeah, I think just generally you'd hope that this sort of confidence diffuses into other areas of my life, as well. So
I love it.
um,
Yeah, I love that, James. Obviously, again, still quite early in this process, so I think the best
yeah,
is yet to come. We just need to see how things unfold. But just again, reminding you guys the context. This is 8 weeks. Like this is what's happening in 8 weeks. So absolutely brilliant to see. Um, what do you feel, James, has helped you stay on track the most? So whether it's like little daily things that you've done, like little self things, or whether you've just kind of just followed processes. But what do you feel like has helped you the most in terms of staying on track?
I think probably a number of things. I quite like all the data and the metrics that the app provides. Obviously, I
Yeah,
have my work that pretty decent. I love that. So while I do like tracking performance and just seeing where patterns develop and where progress is made, and again, that's a reinforcement. Um, I think the check-ins are really valuable. I watch probably your 4 or 5 minute video 3 or 4 times just to make sure that I picked up all the messages. And I think the key is to, and I think from each week, I've taken your 3 or 4 tips and actually put them into action the following week. So I think that helps. I think keeping it sort of fairly simple. I think there's also, you can also get overwhelmed by, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do, you know, all sorts of stuff to try and keep on top of that. And that's in addition to your everyday life. But I think try and simplify it, I've tried to sort of identify sort of 1 or 2 things that I really need to nail as sort of non-negotiables, and then
Yeah.
sort of add the rest on layers as we go. I think living alone actually helps. I don't know if what everyone's situation is, but I've been going to bed at 8:30. I don't think I would have got away with that in my last relationship. So I think not having too much actual distraction in my immediate for most of the time. Obviously, I have my daughter a couple of nights, but so she puts me to bed now. But yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Yeah, I think that those what I've discussed, and then yeah, I think that whole sort of making promises as well. So every day I get up and I sort of work out what I need to do, and I do it basically. Um, it's sort
Yeah.
of that straight. That sort of straightforward really.
I love that.
But I'm in sort of, as I say, fairly fortunate position in terms of I don't have many distractions, bar work and a bit of family stuff. But yeah,
I think what you said there about try not to attack too many things at once, almost in a sense, and
yeah,
just kind of reducing the overwhelm. Because myself and with Sam, we spoke about this today in terms of when you look at everything, like when you look at nutrition as a whole, what do you approach first? For most people, it just be a case of just get breakfast right, or just get the calorie intake right, or just get within 20% of protein target. If you just focus on one thing in relation to whether it's nutrition, whether it's training, whether it's lifestyle, you only need really 3 things per week. And like you say, if you find it easier to implement them, then you start stacking them, and then you get 8 weeks in and you're 7 kilos down. That's the best way to go about it. Not try and do everything perfectly all at once. It's just finding the little 1% across the board. Cool. So,
yeah.
what advice would you give, James, for someone who's struggling to stick to the plan?
Um, well, I'd firstly say don't waste the opportunity. I think you've obviously engaged or you know come onto the program for a reason. You've got
Yeah.
lots of tools, lots of advice, lots of support at your disposal. Um, it'd be a waste if you weren't doing your best to stick to the plan. But I think going back to a couple of my earlier points in terms of what keeps me on track, I think sort of be coachable in terms of listen, take on advice and try and put it into action. There are a few things I remember. I think you've said around sort of having a couple of protein shakes at night. I hate protein shakes, but last week I've done it because it's a quick way just to hit your target before you go to bed. So yeah, it's just I think just taking stuff on board, being open-minded, keep it simple, like we said. Try and focus on those really 1 or 2 most important things that are sort of most related to your goal in terms of what will give you the biggest bang for your buck. And then just stacking stuff. And I think the more you stack, the more discipline you have, it tends to just happen. Not always linear, but in terms of progress, but it will happen eventually as well. So yeah, I don't know really. I've been doing it long enough to give too much advice, but
You've done a great job there. I agree with all of that. And I think quite often it's the little things compounded. I've said this before on calls, but success in the moment is invisible, but it's profound over time. And you just got to see the little things start to stack up. Focus on little implementations that'll make the biggest amount of difference. I think that's really good to hear. I don't feel like I need to add anything to that, James. That was great. Um, so in relation to kind of your overall wins, then what are your biggest wins so far, like physically and emotionally? So what have been the physical benefits, and what have been emotional benefits to you so far?
Yeah, I think the scales are becoming sort of less important for me now. I think it's more around sort of body composition and how I look rather than how heavy I am. Um, as I say, I don't think I've been this light since I was probably early 20s. So, it's quite a long time since I've been at this weight. So I think the body composition, I think how much that's changed in the last, month or two has been really sort of quite encouraging. Um, and I guess it's just there's a long way still to go. So I'm quite excited of where I could potentially get to, given the amount of time it's been so far. Um, I think my sort of metrics generally, my health markers have generally improved. I think my resting heart rate has dropped probably 4 or 5 points since we started. My snoring's reduced. I measured it the other night. I think I told you. I was, I think I measured my snoring in the night, um, probably last summer, and it clocked up about between 60 and 90 minutes of snoring per evening as an average for a week. And then I did it this week, and it was between 1 and 3 minutes of
It's
recorded.
amazing. It's
So,
amazing. That's
so
not. Yeah, go on, Karen James.
yeah, so that's been quite a nice little win, sort of slightly irrelevant to much, but certainly my sleeping's been probably improved because of that. And then I think just emotional. I think it's probably just confidence now. I think having a bit more, sort of finding a bit more of my self-worth. I think
Yeah,
sort of going back historically, I was an overweight kid, and I think that has sort of through my adult life. Um, not necessarily helped me much in terms of my relationship with food, and so I think from that sort of point of view, I think there's been quite a lot of big steps made in the last few months, and I'm now in the place where I'm sort of in control of that part, which I think is important. Well, it's important for me anyway. Because I used to, have really sort of bad behaviours around food. Lots of binge eating, lots of,
yeah.
drinking. I reward exercise with shit food and that sort of stuff. So to sort of cut all that out, for me, it proves that I can do it, and the benefits are coming from that as well. So
No, I really like that. I think, is it fair to say you feel like you back yourself a little bit more generally, not just in terms of getting into shape, but in other things as well? Like you say, confidence goes up in you almost like believe your own word, don't you? When you start to back yourself, it becomes easier to have more confidence in other areas as well.
yeah, I think so. And as I said, I hope this sort of transfers and diffuses into other areas of my life as we go on. But yeah, I think just from even just being in the gym, just feeling quite strong and looking a bit better. It's just small things really. But I think in terms of how you view yourself and that sort of internalization of your sort of self-talk definitely sort of changes as well. So yeah, it's only positive really. I've not really the only sort of challenge which I'll just go back to, I think was something we did talk on. The only sort of other negative experience, bar the foot, was around um, sort of feeling isolated at some point. I think at the
Yeah.
start of the process, and I think it's probably something that's worth mentioning to the group, because I think at the start of the process, I was sort of very sort of hyper focused on sort of
Mm,
ticking all my boxes, and I didn't want anything to sort of impinge on the whole process. And I sort of cut myself off from, not sort of semi intentionally, um, but I suppose also sort of fairly sort of subconsciously as well. And I think that, yeah, so I think I mentioned it in one of my check-ins probably about 4 or 5 weeks in, that
Yeah.
sort of feeling, almost admitting being lonely basically because of my, I suppose, desire of trying to get through this as well as I could. Um, and then we had the chat around sort of lifestyle and not being sustainable and everything else. And I think after that, I've sort of tried to introduce things and get out a bit more and say yes to a couple of things. And I think it's almost just swinging that pendulum back, isn't it?
Yeah.
To some sort of equilibrium, because I definitely went too far in the
Yeah.
first few weeks, just trying to smash through everything, basically.
I agree. I think it changed your perspective, didn't it?
Mm.
When I said to you, I said, look, when you get there, what you don't want to do is then repeat because you have a cycle of over restriction and binge eating, over restriction and binge eating, by having elements of like normal life where you almost have like this mechanism of reward, and it makes you enjoy the process a bit more and you don't feel isolated. You have a healthy relationship with food, exercise, socially. Otherwise, what happens is you become so scared of kind of going back to what you were before. You almost kind of create this identity that's so far away from who you were.
Yeah.
That's what happens to like physique athletes, competitive bodybuilders. What happens after show day? Binge. Then you see them a week later, they're inflamed, they've gained loads of body fat. I remember there's a guy, James, that used to work at a gym where I was at the time, and he was big into keto, super restricted. And he'd do a competition, be absolutely shredded, and I'd see him a week later, and I'd be like, "What's happened?" And that really made the penny drop for me. It made me think, do you know what? There's a right way to do things, and it's about balance. Like if you have 15% allowance for a little bit of what you fancy, but then the other 85% is dialed in, it's geared towards health. You've got a good relationship with food, it helps you perform. That's the best way to do it, 100%. Okay, so listen, James, thank you for sharing that. I'm just gonna come off this screen here just to give people chance to ask a couple of questions, and I hope that was valuable, guys. I'm going to just